It's The Secret History of the Jesuits by Edmond, Chapter 24, Part 3. All right. The Pope excommunicated the heads of the Spanish Republic and declared spiritual war between the Holy See and Madrid. When he produced the encyclical letter Delectissimi Nobis, the Archbishop Goma, new primate of Spain, proclaimed the civil war. The prelates of His Holiness joyfully accepted the horrors of this fratricidal conflict, and Monsignor Gomara, Bishop of Carthagena, interpreted admirably their apostolic sentiments when he said, quote, "Blessed are the cannons if in the breaches they open, the gospel springs up," unquote. The Vatican even recognized Franco's government on the 3rd of August, 1937. 20 months before the end of the Civil War. Belgium was also looked after by Catholic Action, needless to say, an organization eminently ultramontane and Jesuitical. The ground had to be prepared for the approaching invasion of the Führer's armies. So, under the pretense of spiritual renewal, the Hitlerite fascist gospel was diligently preached there by Monsignor Picard, Jesuit, Father Ardent, Jesuit, Father Foucault, Jesuit, etc. A young Belgian who was their victim, like many others, testifies to this, quote, "At that time, all of us were already obsessed with a kind of fascism. The Catholic Action to which I belonged was very sympathetic to Italian fascism. Monsignor Picard proclaimed from the rooftops that Mussolini was a genius and wished fervently for a dictator. Pilgrimages were organized to favor contacts with Italy and fascism. When, with 300 students, I went to Italy, everybody on our return home saluted in the Roman fashion and sang Giovinezza." I'm not sure what that is. It's Giovinezza. Another witness says, after 1928, the group of Leon Degrelle regularly collaborated with Monsignor Picard. Monsignor Picard enlisted the help of Leon Degrelle for a particularly important mission to manage a new publishing house at the Catholic Action Center. This publishing house was given a name which soon became famous. It was Rex. Quote, "The calls for a new regime multiplied. The results of this propaganda in Germany were observed with much interest. In October 1933, an article in Vlan reminded us that the Nazi numbered only 7 in 1919, and that Hitler brought them a few years later. No other dowry than his talent for publicity. Founded on similar principles, the Rexics team started an active propaganda program in the country. Their meetings soon attracted a few hundreds, then thousands of listeners," unquote. Of course, Hitler had brought to the newborn National Socialism, as Mussolini did to fascism, more than the talent for publicity, the support of the papacy. Being only a pale shadow of these two, Leon Degrelle, chief of Christus Rex, was the beneficiary of the same support, but for a very different purpose, as his job was to open his country to the invader. M. Raymond D. Becker says, quote, "I collaborated with the Advent Guardi. This publication issued by Monsignor Picard, aimed at breaking the ties uniting Belgium, France, and England," unquote. We know how quickly the German armies defeated the Belgian defense betrayed by the clerical fifth column. Maybe we remember also that the apostle of Christus Rex, donning the German uniform, went accompanied by much publicity to fight on the Eastern Front at the head of his Waffen SS, recruited mainly amongst the youth of Catholic Action. Then an opportune retreat enabled him to teach Spain. But before that, he gave full vent to his patriotic feelings for the last time. M. Maurice de Bahat writes, quote, 10 years ago in 1944, the port of Anvers, the third most important in the world, fell almost intact into the hands of the British troops. At the time when the population was beginning to see the end of its sufferings, the privations, the most diabolical Nazi invention, fell on it, the flying bombs, V1 and V2. This bombardment, the longest in history as it went on for 6 months, day and night, was kept carefully hidden on the order of the Allied headquarters. This is the reason why, today, the martyrdom of the cities of Anvers and Liege is still generally ignored. Quote, on the eve of the first bombardment, 12th of October, some had heard on Radio Berlin the alarming remarks of the Rexist traitor Leon de Grelle. Quote, I asked my Fuhrer, he screeched, for 20,000 flying bombs. They will chastise an idiotic people. I promise you that they will make of Anvers a city without a port without a city. From that day on, the rhythm of the bombardments was going to accentuate catastrophes and disasters being the result, while the traitor Leon de Grelle was bawling on Radio Berlin, promising cataclysm even more terrible, unquote. Such was the last farewell to his homeland of this monstrous product of the Catholic Action. Obedient pupil of Monsignor Picard, Jesuit, Father Arndt, Jesuit, etc., the chief of Christus Rex strictly followed the papal rules. Quote, the men of the Catholic Action, unquote, wrote Pius XI, quote, would fail in their duty if, as opportunities allow it, they did not try to direct the politics of their province and of their country, unquote. Indeed, Leon de Grelle did his duty, and the result, as we have seen, was in proportion to his zeal. We read in M. Raymond D. Becker's book, quote, the Catholic Action had found in Belgium exceptional men to orchestrate its themes, such as Monsignor Picard, the most important, Canon Gargin, founder of the Joist movement, a bilious, ill-tempered, and visionary man, unquote. This particular one swears today that he has never seen or heard his fellow member, Leon de Grelle. So these two leaders of the Belgian Catholic Action, both working under the crook of Cardinal von Roey, had apparently never met. But what miracle? By what miracle? Of course, the former canon doesn't tell us that. Since then, he has been made Monsignor by Pius XII and director of the Joist movements for the whole world. Another miracle? Nor has Monsignor Cardigan ever met the disreputable chief of Rex during the great Congress described by de Grelle. Quote, I remember the great Congress of the Catholic youth at Brussels in 1930. I was behind Monsignor Picard, who himself was at the side of Cardinal von Roey. 100,000 youths had marched past us for 2 hours, cheering the religious authorities assembled on the platform, unquote. Where, then, was the head of the JOC hiding, whose troops were taking part in this gigantic march past? Was it through a special decree of Providence that these two men were condemned to rub shoulders without seeing each other on official platforms, as well as the Catholic Action Center, which they attended constantly. Monsignor Cargin, a Jesuit, goes further. He pretends to have also verbally fought Rexism. Really, this Catholic Action was a peculiar organization. Not only were the chiefs of its two principal movements, JOC and Rex, playing hide and seek in the corridors, but also one could, as he says, fight what the other did with the full approval of the hierarchy. This fact cannot be disputed. Degrelle was put at the head of Rex by Monsignor Picard himself, under the authority of Cardinal von Rury and the apostolic nuncio Monsignor Macara. So, according to Monsignor Cargin, he keenly disapproved of the actions of his colleague in Catholic Action under the patronage, like himself, of Belgium's primate, and without any consideration for the nuncio, his protector and revered friend, according to Pius XII. The assertion is rather severe. We are even more aware of it when we examine what was the attitude after Hitler's invasion of Belgium of those such as Monsignor Cargin and his associates who today repudiate Degrelle and Rexism. In a book which was put under the bushel when it was published, the chief of Rex himself refreshed memories, as we shall see, and to our knowledge, what he said was never refuted. Quote, being a fervent Christian and acquainted with the impenetrations of spiritual and temporal, I would not have considered cooperating with Hitler without first consulting the religious authorities of my country. I had asked for an interview with His Eminence, Cardinal von Rury. The cardinal received me in a friendly manner one morning at the Episcopal Palace of Malines. He is animated by a total and cyclonic fanaticism. If he had lived a few centuries earlier, he would have, while singing the Magnificent, put the infidels to the sword or burned or let fall into the convent dungeons the not so obedient sheep of his flock. As it is the 20th century, he only has the cursor, but makes it accomplish a great work. For him, everything was important as long as it served the church's interest. If it was something good, we would support it. But anything bad was crushed. And the church was so many avenues of service, her works, parties, newspapers, agriculture cooperatives, Bond, banking institutions, which assured the temporal power of the divine institution. Quote, and now I can sincerely and honestly say that this was the meaning of the cardinal's remarks. Collaboration was the proper thing to do. In fact, the only thing a sensible person would do. During the whole interview, he didn't even consider that another attitude could be possible. For the cardinal, in the autumn of 1940, the war was finished. He didn't even mention the name English or uttered the supposition that an Allied recovery was conceivable. The cardinal did not think that politically anything else but collaboration was possible. He did not object to any of my conceptions and projects. He could have or should have warned me if he thought my idea concerning politics were going astray, as I had come for his advice. Before I left, the cardinal gave me his paternal blessing. Other Catholics as well in the autumn of 1940 looked towards the great tower of St. Rambot. Many entered the Episcopal Palace to ask the advice of Monsignor von Rury or his entourage concerning the morality, usefulness, or necessity of collaboration. Quote, more than 1,000 Catholic burgomasters, all the general secretaries, even though carefully chosen, adapted themselves immediately to the new order. All those good people imprisoned or insulted in 1944 must have wondered in 1940, what does Malines think? But who would believe that either Malines, their bishops, or their priests had been able to put their minds at rest? 8 out of 10 Belgium collaborationists were Catholics. During those decisive weeks, because of the choice which had to be made, Malines and the various bishoprics never issued written or verbal negative advice to myself or to all those other collaborationists, unquote. Quote again, even though not very pleasant, this is the plain or naked truth. The attitude of the high Catholic clergy abroad could only strengthen the conviction of the faithful that collaboration was perfectly compatible with the faith. In Vichy, the highest French prelates had their photo taken as they stood with Marshal Pétain and Pierre Laval after the interview between Hitler and Pétain. In Paris, Cardinal Baudrillard publicly declared that he was a collaborationist. Quote, in Belgium itself, Cardinal von Rory allowed one of the most famous priests of Flanders, his greatest Catholic intellectual, Abbe Ver Chavy, to declare on the 7th of November, 1940, during a solemn session of the Senate and in the presence of a German general, President Rieder, it is the duty of the Cultural Council to build the bridge which will unite Flanders and Germany, unquote. Quote, on the 29th of May, 1940, the day after the surrender, Cardinal von Rory described the invasion as a kind of present from heaven. Be sure, he wrote to the faithful, that we are witnessing at the moment an exceptional intervention of divine providence, which is displaying its power through great events, unquote. Quote again. So after all that, Hitler seemed to be nothing less than a purifying instrument, providentially chastising the Belgian people, unquote. Something very similar was happening in our own country, France, where we were constantly reminded that defeat is more fruitful than victory, as before 1914, when a purifying, thorough bleeding was wished upon France. Also in these memoirs, which fell, or rather were thrown into the oubliette, we find some very interesting details concerning the Boerenbond, the great Catholic and political financial machine of Cardinal von Rory, which largely financed the Flemish section of Louvain's University, unquote. Quote again, the printing house, Standard, was making sure its presses were kept working by printing the most collaborationist appeals of the VNV, Vlaamse Nationalist Verbond. Very soon, the business was rolling in money, being 200% Catholic, 200%, Catholic, and pillars of the church in Flanders. The leaders of Standard would not have considered collaborating unless the cardinal had first given his blessing to it clearly and distinctively. The same was said about the whole of the Catholic press, unquote. All these efforts were aiming at nothing less than Belgium's breakup, as we are reminded by another Catholic writer, M. Gaston Gallard. Quote, the Flemish-speaking Catholics and the autonomist Catholics of Alsace, justified their attitude by their tactic support always given to the Germanic propaganda by the Holy See. When they referred to the memorable letter sent by Pius XI to his Secretary of State, Cardinal Gasperi, on the 26th of June, 1923, they were easily convinced that their politics had the approval of Rome, and of course, Rome did nothing to persuade them otherwise. Had not the nuncio Pacelli, future Pius XII, aptly supported German nationalists and encouraged the so-called oppressed population of High Silesia, had not the autonomist plots of Alice, Upine Malamedy, and Silesia received ecclesiastical approval, which had not always been given discreetly. It was then easy for the Flemish to hide their deeds against Belgium's unity behind the Roman directives, unquote. Also, in 1942, Pope Pius XII asked his non-caricature in Berlin to convey his condolences to Paris on the death of Cardinal Baudrillard, so signifying that he considered the annexation of northern France by Germany as a fact. It also confirmed once again the tactic support always given to the Germanic expansion by the Holy See and himself in particular. Today, we can but scornfully smile when we see the Jesuits of His Holiness quibble over something so obvious and repudiate all complicity with the fifth column they themselves had organized, and especially with Degrelle. As for him, safely kept in his refuge, as he knows too much, he can recollect at leisure the famous verses of Ovid. And I cannot, that's like Latin or something. I don't know what that is. So I'm not even going to pretend I can read that. Okay. We smile when we read the following from R.P. Fassard, Jesuit, quote, in 1916 and 1917, we waited for the American reinforcements with so much impatience. In 1939, we sadly realized that even after war had been declared, Hitler was looked upon favorably by a large part of American opinion, even and especially by Catholics. In 1941 and 1942, we wondered again if the United States would or would not intervene, unquote. So it seems that the good father viewed the results obtained in America by his own Jesuitical brothers, quote, with sadness, unquote. For this is an historical fact, the Christian Front, a Catholic movement opposed to the United States intervention, was directed by the Jesuit father Coughlin, a notorious pro-Hitlerite. Quote, this pious organization lacked nothing and received from Berlin a plentiful supply of propaganda material prepared by Goebbels' office. Through its publication, Social Justice, and radio broadcast, the Jesuit father Coughlin, apostle of the swastika, reached a vast public. He also looked after secret commando cells in the main urban centers, led according to the sons of Loloya's methods and trained by Nazi agents, unquote. A secret document of the Wilhelmstrasse clarifies the following point. Studying the evolution of anti-Semitism in the United States, we note that the number of listeners to the radio broadcast of Father Coughlin, well known for his anti-Semitism, exceeds 20 million. Wow. That's a lot of people. Must we recall the actions of the Jesuit Father Walsh, who was an agent of the Pope, the dean of the School of Political Sciences at the University of Georgetown? I just don't even know, man. Jesuitic nursery of American diplomacy and a zealous propagandist of German politics. At that time, the general of the Society of Jesus was, as by chance, Hulk von Ledowski, a former general in the Austrian army. He succeeded Wernz, a Perusian, in 1915. Has the R.P. Fassard also forgotten that LaCroix wrote all through the war, and especially this, quote, "There is nothing to be gained from an intervention of troops from the other side of the Channel and Atlantic," unquote. Does he not remember either this telegram of His Holiness Pius XII? The Pope sends his blessing to LaCroix, the voice of pontifical thought. Considering so much forgetfulness, one must conclude that members of the Society of Jesus have very short memories. They did not incur this reproach even from their enemies, though. Let us point out that R.P. Fassard expressed his patriotic fears of 1941 and 1942 in 1957 only. His free meditations over 15 years brought some results, and he had time to reread a certain passage of the spiritual exercises, which says that the Jesuit must be ready if the church declares that what he sees as black is white to agree with her, even though his senses tell him the opposite. As far as that is concerned, R.P. Fassard seems to be an excellent Jesuit. On the 7th of March, 1936, Hitler brought the Wehrmacht into the demilitarized Rhine region, so tearing up the Pact of Locarno. On the 11th of March, 1938, it was the Anschluss Union of Austria and Germany. And on the 29th of September of the same year in Munich, France and England had imposed on them by the Reich the annexation of Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. The Führer had come to power thanks to the votes of the Catholic Zentrum only 5 years before, but most of the objectives cynically revealed in Mein Kampf were already realized. This book, an insolent challenge to the Western democracy, was written by the Jesuit Father Stanfel and signed by Hitler. For as so many ignore the fact, it was the Society of Jesus which perfected the famous Pan-German program as laid out in this book, and the Führer endorsed it. Wow, man, that is just absolutely insanely crazy. I mean, I'm picking up bits and pieces. I mean, a lot of it's still over my head. I mean, I totally admit that. Brother and sister, I totally admit it, but I want to finish the book, and what the Lord gives me the understanding of, then I'll understand and walk away, and that's all that matters, I suppose. All right. Okay, brothers and sisters, keep your eyes on Jesus, your nose in the book, which is the Word of God, and embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Till next time, be blessed, be blessed.